Hi, my name is Andrew Zitzer. I'm a professor at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and I have an article in an upcoming issue of Antipode called Food Co-ops and the Paradox of Exclusivity. And this short video is going to be a little conversation about that and some related issues. And I'm joined here by my friend Esteban Kelly.
Hi, yes, I'm Esteban Kelly and I work with AORTA, which is the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance. I'm also a longtime member of Mariposa Food Co-op and a former worker there. And I'm a board member with the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance.
Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
So I wrote this article about the paradox of exclusivity and this issue of food co-ops, and we're going to go a little back and forth and talk about your real-world experience working in co-ops and supporting co-ops, and my experience being a member owner of co-ops, but also trying to write about them from a scholarly perspective. So in this article, I think I came up with some way of phrasing this, at least that's novel, this idea of a paradox of exclusivity, that co-ops, in order to gel and stay together, need to have some kind of sense of group affiliation, something that binds people so that it's not just when the next great grocer opens up down the street, they'll flock there, but something that makes them feel particularly welcome in this place. But if they go too far, the co-ops, in that direction, they run the risk of excluding people and being so specific in their cultural reference points or in their food that people just don't feel like it is for them, or they feel maybe like it's too much for them, and when people who are different from them start to approach the co-op, they don't feel that they're welcome. And the paradox, as I'm calling it, I think has three dimensions.
Okay.
The dimensions are certainly around food, because food co-ops at least lead with food. And when the food is extremely expensive or very culturally specific, there are people who feel quite alienated. The second area is that the way that co-ops market themselves often comes from, with the food and other kinds of elements of the overall identity of the stores, and those can also sort of refer to people in very specific, inclusive, and then subsequently exclusive language. And then finally, the business practices at co-ops can be somewhat confusing or alienating to people who haven't encountered the co-op before, whether it's things like, weighing your own produce and dry goods, or having to work at the store in order to have the privilege of member ownership. People who don't feel used to co-ops in this way can suddenly feel that the co-op is not their store. So that's the basic idea behind the piece that I put together, and your thinking in your work has certainly helped to inform my thinking, and I wanted to hear if you could talk a little bit about your work in this world, and if you see these kind of in-group, out-group, exclusive and inclusive dynamics operating.
Sure. Well, through AORTA, as you know, we've done a lot of consulting and support for food justice efforts, a lot of food sovereignty education, and directly supporting a lot of different food co-op startup, expansion, and just organizing and development and redevelopment efforts. And we've worked with a wide range of food co-ops. Some of them are worker-owned. Some of them are different kind, not necessarily grocery co-ops, but bakeries and things like that. And then a lot of the groups that we have worked with are grocery cooperatives that are really community-based, especially in low or mixed income communities and multiracial neighborhoods. So that's a lot of the work that we bring to the food justice work. In terms of your question of what I see as some of the challenges are in that organizing, I think it gets really down to fundamental societal questions of what does it mean to live in a democratic, multiracial society where you have people from different class backgrounds. And in some ways, due to the historical legacies of segregation, we're still figuring some of that stuff out, where people are coming together not through the sort of cold, alien environment of you walk into a store, you have a business transaction, and you leave. But what does that look like when there's a different dimension where people are expected to have some sense of community or to know each other's names, or where there's an opening where you can actually have input as to what the mission is of that grocery store, how it functions, what kinds of products they carry, and what sort of processes they use when they're engaging their membership, which is the fundamental principle of cooperatives, not just that it's owned by the community, but that it's run by the community at a certain level. And so that always has a cultural dimension to it. So I think some of the challenges that a lot of the groups that I've worked with through Aorta, and even in my own experience, being a member of several different grocery cooperatives around the U.S., come down to that fundamental fact that people are walking in with in a lot of ways, different backgrounds and experiences with everything from community organizing to what their relationship is to their food, even the idea of food literacy, and being able to make their implicit values, the cultural values that they were raised with, explicit enough. The very act of doing that is coded in terms of class background and education levels. That it's not always something that people are very aware of, to be able to disclose and say, oh, here's how my ethnic background relates to the kinds of food that I eat, and here's how I communicate that to our management structure or our buyers or our marketing and outreach campaign of what I want to see in my neighborhood grocery store. So those are some of the challenges. I think also there's challenges in the organizational structure of the groups themselves. Oftentimes you're dealing with a very professional industry, right, in terms of grocery retail, and that doesn't necessarily coincide with a community organizing background. So what we saw at Mariposa was that our success in engaging the community, and it didn't, there's no magical grocery store that has fully overcome these paradoxes and challenges, but we did achieve relative success, and a lot of that was because we had a core group who had community organizing background, and were deeply rooted in principles of food justice from the outset, and then decided to invest their time in our organization, in our cooperative, and in the effort that we were going through to really engage the community and open up our cooperative and overhaul our policies and do a lot of different things to overcome the paradox of exclusivity.
And when you go out into the field working with the communities that bring Aorta in, are there processes that you can depend on and things that you have as your toolkit that you support them in developing that can overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, a lot of it relates to fundamental principles of community organizing, right? So being self-aware and helping groups to do a certain amount of trust building, understanding who they are and what drives and motivates them, why they're invested in the cooperative that they're organizing, and to be able to bring that self-awareness to a broader level of who are you engaging with on the other side of that. What's your understanding? What's your history with the community that you're in? And if there are overlapping or intersecting communities, how can we get an understanding of that, whether that involves trainings or even sometimes study groups, as a lot of community organizing comes down to around issues of class, issues of race, issues of even gentrification in a lot of cases, and how that relates to food, what motivates people, and how important it is to bring a level of nuance to that community organizing instead of seeing different communities as a monolith in terms of race or class for that matter. But to be able to see what's the role of youth of color in this neighborhood, what's the role of elderly people who have community gardens, what's the role of immigrant communities who are growing their own herbs and who might have their own interest in engaging in this project, right? So being able to to do an assessment and an understanding to prepare yourself internally before reaching out to the other, and to just constantly remember that that's a really humble process. To put yourself out there and to lead with questions and to lead with listening and be prepared to hear answers that you aren't necessarily expecting when you ask people what they want in their local grocery store, or what they want to see in their community, or what relationship they want to have as neighbors. And sometimes it's hard for people to even begin with those as the questions, as opposed to what will it take for you to be a member? Right. What kind of member will you be? Please sign up and be involved. I think that being able to really back it up a step and understand that the fundamental thing for community organizing is relationships. That's what we mean by organizing. It's about how do you dig down to that level where people connect with one another, whether that's one-on-one or as groups and cohorts of people. And through the relationship, once that connection is there, you can then sort of build on that foundation and create a tremendous amount of power. And once you come out on the other side of that, the prospect of engaging people to run for your board, to even apply for different positions or advertise by word of mouth, whether it's membership, job opportunities, or even to sort of invest enough to put your voice out there and say, we want to see something change in this cooperative, that it's much easier for that to happen if you've laid that groundwork.
Right. And that's really where the article itself ends, is on this notion of reflective practice and inventory internally so that people will kind of overcome this paradox or this dialectic around exclusivity. And the only thing I would add to the wisdom that you're bringing to the practice is just that the cooperatives have this in their business model.
Yeah.
This is not something that co-ops have to overcome. When we talk about these sort of social enterprise businesses, the idea is, well, we're overcoming the profit motive in order to do social good. Cooperatives believe inherently in concern for community, democratic membership, control, and education. And so if co-ops just hew really closely to their founding values and hold those principles close and act on them, then I think this paradox of exclusivity becomes a non-issue, and we can sort of reintegrate what it means to be a cooperative and really have a transformational gesture towards food, but whatever sector people are able to do social cooperating based on overcoming or at least grappling with those fundamental social problems that we've all inherited and we all reproduce constantly.
Yeah, and I think that the cooperative principles provide a scaffolding to be able to grapple with those societal problems in a way that that has promise for overcoming them, for really addressing things that haven't been able to be solved always through sweeping policies or forced integration, but to really get down at that level of where are your values and principles and how are you enacting that through democracy, through sharing, through solidarity, through concern, through education, that being able to do that. So it's not quite enough to simply go insular on within co-ops and co-op principles and sort of root down and hope for a solution. I really do think that that it involves a certain amount of opening up and reaching out for wisdom that rests in the community and in histories of community organizing, and inserting that into the cooperative model and principles and organizing, I think can yield really important outcomes for really growing the movement and making co-ops much more meaningful for the people and the communities that they're really trying to engage and empower and resource.
Well, I thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very meaningful to me, and it's the inspiration for me to want to write about this work and to participate in this work, because it's not just about a transaction where I go and I get the kohlrabi and I leave. This is really about making my world a healthier place in every way. And so I thank you for talking to me today, and I thank you for continuing to do this work that you're doing with your communities that you have been part of, and more to come.